Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in and welcome to Questpoli, the MARC newspaper series of interview with all of the executive candidates for the SRC. I'm Kendra Perrin, Editor-in-Chief of the MARC, and with me here I have Nigel, McKenzie, and Schipper, esteemed political analysts. And today we're joined by the running block of Marcella, Lauren, and Dawn. Would each of you please say your names and what positions you're running for?
I'm Lauren, I'm running for Vice President.
And I'm Don, I'm running for Minister of Finance.
I'm Marcella and I'm running for President.
Cool, so just a quick introduction to this running block. We have Marcella, Lauren, and Dawn who are running as a group running block under the platform to advocate, integrate, and reform. Their platform specifics involve a multi-year plan towards SRC autonomy, constructing a student union building, working on student well-being and social justice, and SRC constitutional reform. They also plan to make student organization jobs paid for groups like Residence Council, the Emergency Response Team, and the Lumen Room, which, by our calculations, have a pretty hefty price tag. We hope to hear more detail about their platform, their experience, and how they're going to implement their platform, if elected, to the SRC of 2016. So, with that, this is a question to all of you. You explicitly say that you have a multi-year plan for the SRC, but the council has a notorious high turnover rate, and also there is no guarantee that you'd be elected for multiple years. Are you aware of this, and have you guys thought about this when designing a multi-year plan?
Sure. Do you want to go on that?
Sure. So I think this touches mostly on the point of constitutional reform. Our plan and our three-pillar platform to integrate, advocate, and reform is based on the idea that we want to change the structure of the SRC, and mostly doing that through constitutional reform to ensure that we can have a more sort of sustainable SRC, right? So that not with every turnover by every year, we're going to go in completely different directions. So that would include a long-term financial plan, long-term like political goals, so to say, yeah.
And the way to make sure that those things are going to be sustained throughout different generations of the SRC is making the turnover, the pass-on period from the current SRC to next generations a much more smooth one, a much more like slow transition period. So we want both to ensure that the new elected both exec team and ministerial team this year are not only shadowing the current SRC members, but actively participating in their jobs, helping them getting stuff done and learning, getting their hands dirty. But also next year we have commitment from several current SRC members to be part of our takeover period in the first couple of months, to be part of our meetings and help us transitioning. We hope to make that not only a traditional but also a constitutional part of our SRC to ensure that the long-term projects, that the new groups understand the importance of keeping the ball rolling of whatever the previous year has been working on.
And can you three say at this point that if you get elected for this year, do you promise that you'll run again for the following year, or is that not a decision that's been made yet?
That's not really a decision that's been made, but one of the things that we think is really important about how the SRC, people really don't come back to run again, is the minister burnout, and the council is so overworked. So we want to, with our constitutional reform, try to address that and make having a minister job more manageable, so that it's not a 1 year that you're totally burnt out of and there's no possibility really to come back.
So you guys have repeatedly talked about constitutional reform as the foundation for your platform, but you haven't really specified exactly what your plans actually do. So could you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, so constitutional reform is a broad and kind of tedious process, right? It sounds dry, it is a little dry, but in my experience it's a very effective tool to change these things. And so what it would specifically look like is that in the months between the elections now and the start of next year, so when the new SRC would actually go into function, we would put together a committee and push through that paperwork. The reason we haven't specified all the exact policies is because we don't want to, we're not claiming that we have all these answers, right? And the SRC ultimately is a body of representation, and so this is going to have to be a process with a lot of incorporation of student opinion and a lot of active effort to seek out the student voice and see, what are the things and what are the exact policies that should be changed and in what ways.
In fact, the constitutional reform not only addresses the current issues that we think that the SRC has internally, but also our long-term plan towards autonomy. We believe that the constitution that we currently have is not solid nor specific enough for us to become an autonomous institution. We want to get legal advice from someone that has enough knowledge in the field to inform us how to form a good enough constitution that would protect the SRC members and make it a solid enough body that could eventually become autonomous.
I'm curious about, with this constitutional reform, what the SRC is in the practice of doing is just passing bylaws, because I believe it has to be it's a 60% quorum requirement to actually make constitutional reforms.
40%, but yeah.
40%? Okay, and when Graham Fisher tried to do it a couple years ago, there was a turnout that wasn't anywhere close to that. So what do you plan to do with the existing constitution, and would this constitutional reform basically be a new constitution that would somehow replace the old one, or just a series of sweeping bylaws?
Do you want me to speak to that? Yeah. So the idea is, like you said, currently the Constitution is more amendments and bylaws than it is the original articles, right? And it's a mess, right? And that is partially due to a 40% quorum. And last year for the executive elections, only 25% of the student body voted.
Yeah.
At least that's the figure we got from the elections committee. So you can already see that is right. That is obviously. It's almost impossible to change it. And so the idea would be to compose an entirely new constitution with a lot of student voice so that it's already sort of prepared to be voted on once in a referendum and that it can pass from there.
And it would just be a yes or no to this new constitution?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And understanding that in such a new school, a 3-4 year difference from when a constitution was written and to, in relation to what the student body actually needs makes a huge amount of difference. So we want to make sure that people not only know that this is a central aspect of our platform, but that if we are elected, we're going to need a lot of support from the student group to approve it as soon as the new school year starts, so we can get going from there.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Which is why we want to involve them in the writing process as well.
Awesome. So, Lauren, I have a question for you specifically. On part of your platform, you say that you are not only running together, but, quote, in solidarity with many of the ministerial candidates, end quote. What does this mean? Do you already have other ministers who have pledged to run? Do you have a running group, or do you consider them members of your political group? Who's on your team already?
Well, it's not really an official group or anything like that, but we did have we have been in conversation and had a big discussion on Saturday with a bunch of people who, as many people as we could find who are planning to run for ministerial positions, to talk about what they want from their potential executive team and what is important to them for the SRC next year. So we, with that, are really saying that we're focused on the ministers and really want to support them. So talking to them even before the election has happened about what interests and opinions and goals are there.
Can you tell us some people who are planning to run?
I haven't asked them if they would be okay with that, so no.
But you have some particular people who have agreed to run if you're elected?
Yes. So this conversation started around at the beginning of last week. Shui, the third year, and I were talking. Both of us had been talking to people who asked us, "Are you going to run? Would you be interested in running?" And we're both talking about our insecurities. I would love to be politically active in the SRC next year, but I'm scared of being stuck with a group that I have very little in common with, and it just turns out to be a really frustrating process and a really huge time commitment throughout the entirety of the year. So I would not like to run without knowing who's going to be there. And both of us realized that was a really bad thing, a really sad thing that both of us were thinking so negatively about running. And then we agreed with each other, if you run, I'll run. And then we realized the importance of having an idea of what are the other faces that will potentially be with us if we make that commitment, which is why we started this creative conversation. And from there, it just kind of started popping out word of mouth. And we had several ministers that would be running for the same position as part of that conversation. So it's not like we are running together and we want all these folks in. It's all right, with the possibility of some of us being elected, what is one thing that we all agree on that we think we should start working already?
So, following up on that, there is a good possibility that you won't all end up being elected. How do you plan on carrying on your platform if only, say, one or two of you are elected? And how do you plan on working with other candidates when you may have a platform that doesn't quite match theirs?
I mean, ultimately, our platform is our own idea of what we think, I don't want to generalize too much, but what we think students want and students need, right? And it again, coming back to the point that ultimately the SRC is a body of representation, right? It's not a body for us to push our political ideals. That being said, it's not any different from past elections that if we end up being split and some of us would end up, or only even one of us would end up in an executive position, then that's not different from having to work with the other executive ministers and the president than it would be in the years before this whole running block thing got introduced.
In fact, one of the other candidates that's running for the exec team, one of the independent ones, was part of our conversation on Saturday, and we had a really healthy discussion of like, hey, here are some things that are part of our platform and we think that are really positive, and the other way around as well. He was pointing out things that he liked about our platform, and we were discussing, well, you know what, one of us is going to get in and the other one won't, so we should work together whenever that gets established towards a similar goal, because we have ultimately like a common intention of making the SRC more efficient and more representative for our students. We haven't had a conversation yet. I think of running for a ministerial position if I don't get elected for the exec, because I'm really invested in turning the SRC into something else, and it would be interesting to hear from other candidates how much partnership they would like to establish with us if we are the ones elected.
Great. So, Marcel, picking up on the theme of representation, you say that in order for the SRC to do what you want it to integrate, advocate, and reform, it must focus on representation, for which student input is essential, and especially the input of other student leaders on campus. So I want to ask how you plan on getting this student input, and specifically through what channels outside of the 2 weekly meetings
Right, so
that student input could come.
So tying up a little bit with what Lauren was speaking earlier about early ministerial burnout, we realized that the way that the current meetings run, that is such a huge time commitment. Sometimes ministers sit through extremely long meetings for voting for projects that don't necessarily have anything to do with their mandates. We want to create more flexibility in the new constitution that we plan on putting in place. So that meant that me or any of them as the exec team can call our ministers and say, hey, like, meeting that we're having on Monday, we have this, and that in our agenda. Please obviously feel free to come and join us. But if not, you can take that time to meet with your Human Rights Committee and work on those things. So we want to give them more flexibility to work with specific groups, and those groups are going to be the ones where campus leaders are going to be actively, we're going to be actively seeking out for their opinions and their inputs on how things should be working, where they're relevant, right? We're not going to ask a Minister of Health and Wellness to give an opinion on what band should be contracted for.
And how are you going to hold ministers accountable for that extra time if they're not at a meeting?
Well, first of all, we're probably going to establish an environment in the SRC where we're not seeking to accuse our ministers of not putting enough time. We want to create that healthy environment where we're all seeking a common goal. So we don't want them to get burned out. We want them to get stuff done, things that are actually relevant for their area of interest, and that can be measured through progress in their projects that they have been working on, which is something that the exec is going to be focusing on.
So is the idea something like creating focus groups, and the nature of that focus group would differ depending on the minister's
Precisely.
platform? Okay, makes sense.
I have a really specific question for you guys. You talk in your platform about establishing, you say we want work study positions for all students. You say you believe that student positions should be accessible to all students regardless of income. So you want to turn on-campus positions like the SRC and Residence Council into paid jobs for students with financial aid. Just like back of the envelope calculation, about 70 employees, that's about $130,000. Where's that money going to come from?
One of the things with our idea around the work study is that a lot of students currently hold 2 positions, like they are a floor rep and have a work study or something like that, and do find it to be a really big time crunch. There's also some people I've talked to who work in the library who say that their job, they aren't really needed there, but they're guaranteed a work study, so they have that job. It probably we think from talking to from hearing about those things, that it wouldn't be a direct additional cost, but more of moving around work-study positions.
You think that can compensate for $130,000 of funding?
130,000. I mean, that's your estimate, right?
That's counting all
Yeah.
all of the members, all the current members of all the councils that you listed,
Yeah,
and
so-
assuming that they're each paid $2,000 a year as every other work study
Right,
student
but
is.
the twist point is that we wanted to make those paid positions only for people that are already in work and study. So theoretically, those people wouldn't be paid for their other positions. So that money is not going to be added to the balance that the university has to pay for students. It's just going to be paid for something different. So instead of me spending,
I'm just curious if
Go ahead.
you've contacted anyone from Quest about doing something like this.
the possibilities of that. We have been in touch with administration and obviously haven't got much information of what the logistics of that would look like. But in conversation with Darren, in fact, from Student Affairs, he's been working really hard to work on a compensation process for FLOREP and members from the Student Residence Council. And he sees the value in there's obviously like a setup already of acknowledging the work and the time commitment that students are putting in. So there have been conversations about that.
And we gotta see what's possible, right? Like, we can't already know who is going to be paid what and when and for what position. But I think there's definitely value in pushing for work-study eligibility in some of these positions at least. For example, the SRC and the Residential Council. The other bodies that you mentioned were more related to collaboration with the SRC rather than making those paid positions. But whatever that is, it's pushing for allowing people to engage in student politics without meaning that they can therefore sustain themselves without a paid position on campus. Right? So that it's not only accessible to those who can afford not to have a job.
I think we're in full agreement of that. It's just
Yeah.
where would that money come from and whether you address those logistics.
Maybe I'm just misunderstanding the system, but what about people who, like, many people aren't eligible for work study?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Will they just not be paid if they're in those positions?
There's something that this is something that we're still working our heads around because our main concern with that came from people particularly approaching Lauren and telling her about their concerns with sustaining a political position on campus and not being able to have a part-time job in Squamish, for example. So that's how we thought about addressing it, but then we came across the injustice of having some people compensated and other folks not. So we've been working around the idea of differentiating between work-study position and a compensated position depending on what your financial needs are and whether or not you're in financial aid by university, but we haven't come up with what exactly that's going to look like and how different other figures are going to be for each person.
And you think that you can accomplish that in a year?
I mean, we can talk about it with the entire student body and get their input on what the constitution, the new constitution that we want to establish, how it should address that disparity.
Cool. Okay, so leading off this kind of financial discussion, specifically for you, Dan, as Minister of Finance, a lot of your platform relies on kind of a radical departure from current SRC finances and the current SRC finance systems. You're looking at dealing with SRC autonomy as some kind of separate entity, so you're going to have a whole new finance system for that. This whole system with paying paying students for compensating them for their positions. What skill set do you think, or where do you have any experience that would give you those specific skills to deal with these very important new financial systems that we're going to have to create?
So I've this is in my little biography on the website, which I'm sure you've read, as you seem very researched. I've worked with sort of fund management, mostly in sort of art scene. So there was one independent music festival that happened about 4 or 5 years ago, and similarly like this interdisciplinary arts and culture show. I've already researched it to a fair extent. I've been in touch with like Minister of Finance who are like sort of the more well-regarded.
Like who?
I don't want to put them on the spot. It's up to them if they would like to be public about this and in talking to me. Regardless of that, there are things like the harmonized sales tax in BC, right? It's a tax we all pay for consumption of goods. And because of the type of institution we are, we can get a tax return on that. On a projected budget of $140,000, that's about 15 grand. We've gotten that back in the past, but there's no continuity across all the years, like we've talked about before, right? Because of the turnover. Annual reports are either too lengthy or not well communicated, so these things are not always captured. And then that means that over multiple years, we lose sometimes as much as 15 grand, right? So there's all these specific things that I've seen how they work in other contexts that I can research here in BC and here at Quest in these specific contexts to see, to see how they can pan out in this context.
Awesome. So we're going to wrap it up with that, but thank you all so much for tuning in, and thank you so much to Marcella, Lauren, and Don for joining us today.
Thank you.
And remember that no matter who you vote for, just go out and vote on Friday, February 26th. Thank you very much. Thanks, you guys.